So, given the disastrous meeting that took place between Trump and Zelensky on Friday, there is an elevated chance that the United States could cut off aid to Ukraine. Well, such a move would have both an immediate and a long term impact. In this video, I will focus on the immediate impact. In the next, I will focus on the long term impact. So, militarily, a sudden halt in U.S. military aid to Ukraine would trigger immediate supply chain shortages on the battlefield, particularly in artillery, rockets, air defenses, etc. Ukraine has stated that it has about 6 months of reserves, and thankfully, as of now, aid from the US has not been cut off, so those reserves remain intact for at least an additional few months. However, a cutoff would lead to critical shortages of artillery and air defense ammunition, leaving Ukrainian forces vulnerable. The issue has already contributed to territorial losses, such as the recent withdrawal from Avdiivka. If resupply collapses, similar retreats could multiply, weakening Ukraine's defensive lines. Without consistent U.S. arms deliveries, the balance of power could shift in Russia's favor. Ukrainian defenses are stretched but still hold, yet a lack of ammunition could allow Russian forces to breach frontline positions. If Ukraine cannot maintain firepower, Moscow could seize the initiative, capturing key cities like Pokrovsk or Kupiansk, which potentially could threaten Kharkiv. Analysts warn that the current battlefield stalemate could quickly collapse into Russian advances if Ukraine cannot sustain its firepower. Ukraine would be forced to scale back offensive operations and adopt a more defensive attritional strategy, which is a shift that is already underway due to the uncertainty over the future of U.S. aid. Kyiv would also lean more on European and NATO allies, but their capacity is limited. European nations provide about $1.8 billion per month in military aid, which is similar to the amount of aid that the United States was providing in 2023, but strained stockpiles and production limits make it difficult to replace U.S. aid. Furthermore, if the U.S. withdraws, many European countries may also reduce their support due to their own constraints. To compensate, Ukraine may seek aid from Canada, the United Kingdom, Poland, or other NATO states, but replacing U.S. capabilities overnight is nearly impossible. In the short term, Ukraine would have to rely on domestic arms production and older Soviet-era stockpiles to prevent a collapse in its defenses. Economically, a U.S. aid cutoff would destabilize Ukraine's government finances, as Kyiv relies heavily on external support to fund essential operations while channeling domestic revenues to the war. Since 2022, Ukraine has received over $73.6 billion in direct budgetary support from Western allies, which covers salaries, pensions, and social programs. Without this aid, Ukraine would face an immediate budget deficit, struggling to pay government workers, soldiers, and pensioners on time. The 2024 budget had a $43 billion deficit, but that was covered largely by about $41 billion in international aid. If U.S. funds disappear, Kyiv may be forced to slash public spending or delay payments, weakening both civilian services and wartime logistics. Last year, we saw delays in U.S. and European Union aid, which raised concerns about a looming fiscal crisis at a critical moment. Losing U.S. financial support would severely pressure Ukraine's currency, called the hryvnia, and jeopardize their economic stability. So far, foreign aid has kept inflation in check and bolstered foreign currency reserves, but without it, Ukraine may have to print money or take on short-term debt, both of which carry serious risks. A similar move in late 2022 caused inflation to spike to 27% in Ukraine. Experts warn that printing money now could trigger hyperinflation and severe currency devaluation, making imports and basic goods more expensive, further reducing the purchasing power of the average Ukrainian during wartime. A major devaluation of the hryvnia may be unavoidable if external funding dries up. Additionally, an aid cutoff would erode investors' and creditor confidence, potentially jeopardizing Ukraine's IMF support program. If the IMF cannot certify Ukraine's 12-month financing due to aid reductions, future loans and debt relief could stall, worsening their economic crisis. Beyond military aid, U.S. assistance has been crucial for humanitarian relief and infrastructure repairs. A sudden cutoff could halt ongoing reconstruction efforts, disrupting repairs to utilities and housing, as well as reducing aid for displaced Ukrainians. Many state and NGO services, including medical aid, shelters, and food assistance, rely on foreign funding. European institutions and other donors may try to compensate, but short-term resource gaps would be inevitable, with critical consequences. Additionally, a delay in long-term reconstruction projects could deter international investors and companies interested in post-war rebuilding as uncertainty over Western support grows. The combined effects of a government funding crisis, currency instability, and stalled reconstruction would significantly worsen hardships for Ukraine's population in the near term. Now, from a diplomatic standpoint, a U.S. pullback would immediately test Europe's resolve and unity. Initially, European leaders would likely make strong commitments to continue to support Ukraine with efforts to increase aid deliveries. The EU has already pledged $50 billion in a multi year deal to support Ukraine. There have been other multinational packages as well, showing strong support, and in a crisis, European states might expedite or even expand the aid. Some of these proposed emergency measures include EU wide borrowing to fund Ukraine's defense, using frozen Russian assets for Ukraine's war effort, and jointly purchasing weapons from third parties, including US manufacturers, through foreign military sales. The problem with those military sales is years of underinvestment in defense have depleted stockpiles internally, and many European countries are already supplying as much as they can. So political divisions could emerge. Germany and France may face public resistance to drastically increase aid, and nations like Hungary, who have previously opposed EU support packages, may grow stronger. Without US leadership, European support could become fragmented, making Ukraine's diplomatic position weaker and giving Russia an opportunity to exploit divisions within the Western coalition. For Russia, a US aid cutoff would be a massive strategic victory, and Putin would likely act swiftly to capitalize. The Kremlin has long believed that Western unity would eventually collapse, and a US withdrawal would reinforce that view. Militarily, Russia might escalate its offensives, believing that Ukraine's ability to resist will weaken with each passing week of no resupply. The Russian army would likely intensify pressure across multiple fronts, attempting to force a battlefield breakthrough or even a rapid Ukrainian collapse before Europe can respond effectively. Diplomatically, Putin would have no incentive to negotiate seriously. There is zero chance of Russia ending the war when US support wavers. The Kremlin would use propaganda to demoralize Ukraine and convince European audiences that supporting Kyiv is futile. Russia might also pressure European leaders with promises of energy deals or peace talks aiming to fracture the remaining Western coalition. On the battlefield, Russian strategy could either become more aggressive if Moscow believes it can deliver a decisive blow, which I don't believe it can, or it might momentarily scale back attacks to encourage further European hesitation. Either way, Russia's strategic position improves immediately when US aid stops. If a Ukrainian collapse appears likely, Putin may even mobilize additional reserves or deploy some of their more advanced military equipment to secure victory. This would raise concerns in neighboring states like Moldova and Baltic countries, as a triumphant Russia might set its sights on further regional expansion. So that's what we will see in the short term. In the next video, I will talk about the long-term implications. See you there.